By the third month without a real paycheck, I could tell you exactly how long a grown man will stare at his banking app before he starts lying to himself. About 30 seconds. First 10, you refresh. Next 10, you check if the Wi-Fi dropped. Last 10, you convince yourself the bank is slow today and it'll hit any minute now. I'm Jake, 32, project manager at a small construction and maintenance company that likes to call itself lean and agile. Because underfunded and badly managed doesn't look as good on the website. We weren't always like this. When I joined, pay hit every other Friday at 9:14 a.m. like clockwork. You could set your coffee break by it. Guys in the field would text each other dumb screenshots of the payroll deposit line like it was some running joke. Then one month, it hit at noon. "Bank's dragging today," my boss, Mark Holt, said, waving it off. "New system on their end. Nothing to stress over." No one stressed. Things happen. The next month, it hits Saturday instead of Friday. "Wire issue," he said. "Transfers inbound. We're waiting on that transfer. Should clear overnight." People grumbled a little, but the money showed up, and everyone has that one friend who's always late, but still shows, so you let it slide. Month 3, it didn't hit at all. That's when the phrase started living in my voicemail. "Hey Jake, it's Mark. We're waiting on that transfer. Should be today or tomorrow. Just hang tight." The first time I played it, I actually paused at we. We who? You and your reflection? I told myself I was being unfair. He sounded stressed. The whole office felt tighter. Quiet hallways, longer meetings, jokes that didn't quite land. The receptionist stopped bringing homemade cookies on Fridays. That's how you know morale's actually dying. What they don't tell you about temporary cash flow issues is that they land right on top of your non-temporary bills. My rent doesn't care about our banking relationship. My car payment doesn't care that work has been slow, but we're turning the corner. The grocery store does not accept "we're waiting on that transfer" at the checkout. So I did what most people do too long. I carried it myself. I moved money around. I cashed out the tiny 401k I'd started. I told my landlord I'd be a few days late and over-explained like my life depended on him believing I wasn't a screw-up. "It's my company," I said. "They're behind, but I've been there 3 years. They've always made it right." He just looked at me over his glasses like he'd heard that sentence 100 times from 100 tenants, and most of them were lying to themselves. At the office, nobody wanted to be the first one to say it out loud. We joked instead. "Guess I'll pay my rent with good vibes this month. Can I get half my paycheck now and the other half when the transfer arrives? Think the electric company takes exposure?" But under all the jokes was the quiet math of people figuring out how long they could stay. I stayed the longest. Part of it was loyalty. Part of it was stubbornness. Part of it was that this job was the first time in a long time I'd felt like I was actually good at something, and I didn't want to admit the people in charge were running it into a wall. Mark made it easier to believe him because he didn't act like some cartoon villain. He was tired. He stayed late. He took calls at all hours. He walked around with a coffee cup he never finished and a smile that didn't reach his eyes anymore. "We're a team," he'd tell us in meetings. "We're in this together. The investors are slow approving a new credit line, but once that transfer lands, we're going to be in a great spot. I just need you guys with me a little longer." He knew every sentence we wanted to hear. One night, I stayed late finishing a bid. It was April. Rain slapping the windows. The kind of night where the office feels like a waiting room for bad news. The cleaning crew had come and gone. The lights in the hallway were on motion sensors, so only my corner and Mark's office glowed. I was about to shut my laptop when I heard his door click. He didn't know I was still there. Our cubicles sit in this L shape where if you're quiet, you might as well be invisible. I heard his chair creak, then his voice. "Yeah, I saw the notice," he said. His tone was different. No team spirit, no we, just flat. I put the manual hold on that incoming. I know exactly what I did. I froze, hand on my mouse. There was a pause. I could hear the faint buzz of his monitor, the rain, his sigh. "Because they'll freak if they see the full amount land and then move," he said. I need to clean up the overdraft first before payroll sees anything. If they see the gap, the board will start asking where it went. I'm not having that conversation yet. Silence. My heart started punching my ribs. No, they don't know, he said, voice low. They think the bank is slow. That's the line, and we're sticking to it until the transfer from the other account posts. Once that hits, I release the hold. Payroll goes out, and everyone sleeps fine. Other account. Hold. Not the bank is slow. Not system issue. He did this. On purpose. There's a difference between things are hard and someone is using your life as a temporary patch on their own screw-ups. In about 30 seconds, standing in the glow of my monitor, I crossed that line in my head. He must have heard my chair shift or seen movement, because his voice stopped mid-sentence. The door opened and footsteps came down the hall. "Jake," he called, too casual. "You still here?" I closed my laptop like I'd been about to leave anyway. "Yeah," I said, popping up. "Just wrapping up the Miller bid." He smiled, that thin, exhausted smile. "You're a machine, man. Go home. We'll talk timelines in the morning." His eyes flicked past me to my screen, making sure it was dark. For a second I wondered if he'd ask what I'd heard. He didn't. Maybe he convinced himself I hadn't heard enough words in the right order to make sense. On the drive home, the conversation replayed in my head, every sentence suddenly louder than the rain on the windshield. Manual hold. Other account. They'll freak if they see. I told myself there had to be some explanation. Maybe he was smoothing something out. Maybe he really was trying to keep the company afloat. Maybe he'd fix it all next week, and this would be a story I told years later about how we survived a rough patch. That's the thing about people like me. We're so used to carrying the weight that we'll add another 30 pounds of denial on top if it means we don't have to admit we've been played. When I got home, I checked my banking app again, just in case. Same empty line where a deposit should have been. Same little spinning circle when I refreshed. Half an hour later, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Voicemail from Mark. I hit play on speaker while I rinsed dishes. "Hey, Jake, it's Mark." He sounded tired, but not apologetic, like this was just another task on his list. "We're waiting on that transfer. Should clear by end of day tomorrow. Don't make this harder by freaking people out, okay? I need you calm on this." He paused, then his voice sharpened just a notch. "No more questions. Just trust me on this one." The message ended. The sink kept running. The room felt smaller. I wiped my hands on a towel and stared at my phone, replaying that last line in my head. No more questions. The thing about telling yourself you're overreacting is that it works, right up until the moment it doesn't. The next morning, the office felt heavier than usual. Not dramatic, not chaotic. Just weighted. Like everyone had slept badly and blamed the pillow instead of the truth. Mark wasn't in yet, which was unusual. His car was usually the first in the lot. I saw the accountants whispering near the copier, eyes darting toward his office. The field guys came in slow, grabbing coffee with this silent question hanging over them. Is today the day we get paid? I wanted to be the calm one. That was always my role. But now every detail felt sharper. Every whispered conversation, every glance toward the closed office door, every sigh. By 10 a.m., still no pay, still no Mark, still that same voicemail sitting like a weight in my pocket. I tried to work, but my brain kept drifting back to what I'd overheard. Manual hold, other account. They'll freak if they see the amount land and move. This wasn't a delay. This wasn't a banking hiccup. This was a man pulling a sheet over a body and hoping no one asked why the feet were sticking out. At 11:20, our junior accountant, Lydia, tapped on my cubicle wall. "Can you come here for a sec?" Her voice was too steady. When someone is that steady, they're usually one tremor away from cracking. She led me toward the break room, away from cameras, away from traffic. She shut the door softly. "Jake, you know more than you're saying, right?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. That silence was the first honest thing I'd done in weeks. Lydia rubbed her arm like she was trying to warm herself. I can't say much. If he knows I said anything, I'm done. But something's wrong with the accounts. Something he isn't telling us. Her voice wavered, then steadied again. The last 3 payroll cycles came through a secondary business account he moved funds into. I saw the transfers. They weren't delays. They were redirected. Redirected. Lydia, I said, what do you mean, redirected? Her throat bobbed. I mean, the money came in, and then it went right back out within minutes. Every time. And he tagged every outbound transfer as a temporary balance correction. She paused, looking at the floor. Jake, payroll was funded. He just didn't release it. I felt something cold settle behind my ribs. Something that wasn't shock. Recognition. And that's not the worst part, she whispered. There was a long, quiet beat before she lifted her eyes to mine. Yesterday's deposit, the one he said we were waiting for, it landed. My mouth went dry. When? I asked. 9:07 a.m. Yesterday? She nodded. My voice sounded like someone else's. Where is it now? Another long silence. Then softly. Gone. It shouldn't have been surprising, but it was. It hit like a familiar pain finally naming itself. Lydia stepped closer. Jake, you're the only one he listens to. If you confront him, maybe he'll come clean. I shook my head. No. If I confront him now, he'll bury everything deeper. Her breath caught. So what do we do? I didn't know yet, but I knew something had shifted in me overnight. I wasn't the man refreshing his banking app anymore. I wasn't waiting for someone to fix the problem they created, but that was just the beginning. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. Lydia watched my face, and I could tell she felt it too. Some kind of quiet decision settling into place. Around noon, Mark finally walked through the front door with his coat unbuttoned and his smile wound too tight. He clapped his hands together like a kindergarten teacher trying to reset a chaotic class. Morning, everyone. Busy day ahead. Let's make magic happen. Nobody laughed. He went straight into his office, door shutting a little too hard. A few minutes later, his voice drifted down the hallway. Forced cheer on the phone, talking numbers that didn't sound like numbers that actually existed. I stood outside his office for a full 10 seconds before I walked away. Not because I was scared, because I needed to be smart. At my desk, I opened a shared back-end folder, used for archived vendor invoices. It wasn't meant for payroll documents, but sometimes Mark misplaced files there, and Mark had been messy lately. I scrolled, slow at first, then faster. There it was, a system-generated alert from our bank. Automatic notice, manual hold applied, authorization required for release. Authorized by Holt, M. Executive transfer permissions. I clicked into the details. My stomach clenched. The past 3 months of delayed payments weren't just late. They had been manually intercepted. Not once. Not twice. Every single time. He didn't just lie to us. He engineered the lie. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly, feeling a mix of anger and clarity, building in equal measure. Looking at that screen was like staring at a map of a forest you'd been lost in for weeks, and suddenly realizing every wrong turn had been intentional. Mark called my cell a minute later. His voice was smooth, controlled. Jake, I heard some of the guys are asking questions about payroll again. I need you to help keep spirits up. I didn't speak. He continued, softer now, like he was soothing a skittish animal. We're waiting on that transfer. You know the drill. Don't stir the pot. The quiet in me sharpened. I didn't know it yet. I'd think later. But that decision of his would cost him everything. I hung up without answering. For the first time since this started, I wasn't the one waiting. I was the one preparing. When people snap, it's loud. When people decide, really decide, it's almost silent. That's the part nobody warns you about. I didn't storm into Mark's office. I didn't make a scene. I didn't demand answers he'd only lie through. Instead, something in me settled. Not anger, not panic. Direction. I spent the next 2 days doing what I've always done best, working. Only this time, the job wasn't construction management. It was demolition. Quiet, careful demolition. I started with the people who'd left the company recently, the ones who disappeared without explanation. A team doesn't lose 6 long-term employees in a year for no reason. So I reached out. A text to Marco, our former electrician lead. A message to Devin, who ran procurement. A quiet DM to Grace from billing. They didn't need convincing. Within hours, I had replies that formed a pattern so clean it felt rehearsed. They'd all left for one reason. Missing pay. Same excuses. Same delays. Same, we're waiting on that transfer. And then one day, each of them hit their personal limit. They quit, and Mark made sure the door shut quietly behind them to keep the rest of us from asking why. Grace added something else, something that made the back of my neck go cold. Before I left, I saw a reimbursement to Mark's name. 5 figures, labeled corporate advancement. It looked wrong. Wrong was an understatement. If this were a normal company, I could have gone to HR. But HR was Mark's sister, literally. Her office might as well have had a sign that said, "Complaints go here to die." So I kept digging. By Thursday morning, I had a folder, clean, organized, time-stamped. Bank notices, redirected transfers, payroll logs, past due vendor warnings, internal memos, every breadcrumb I could gather. But evidence was useless unless you put it in the right hands. And we had exactly one set of hands that mattered. The investors. We never met them. They were a quiet trio who put money in, got quarterly updates, and stayed as far from construction sites as humanly possible. I didn't even know their names until I started reading between the lines of old company emails. One stood out, Warren Calhoun, primary investor, old money calm. The kind of man who signs checks with a fountain pen and expects the world to stay arranged. Men like that, I hate surprises. Mark had been feeding him curated stories, but the books didn't lie. The cash flow reports told a different tale, one I now understood too well. I called Warren's office. His assistant picked up, crisp and clipped. "Mr. Calhoun isn't available." "I have information regarding payroll misappropriation and transfer interference," I said. "I can prove it. Employees are affected, accounts are falsified, and I have documentation." A beat of silence. Then, "Hold, please." 20 seconds later, a steady, older voice came on the line. "Mr. Jake, is it?" "Yes, sir." "You have my attention." We met that afternoon at a quiet cafe across town, the kind of place where nothing dramatic is supposed to happen. Warren was a gray suit with sharp eyes. He listened uninterrupted as I laid everything out, every document, every timeline, every lie. When I finished, he didn't speak right away. He just breathed out once, long and slow. "Why come to me?" he finally asked. "Because going to Mark won't fix it," I said, "and going to HR will bury it." He nodded like he expected that answer. "And what do you want out of this, Jake?" "Nothing," I said honestly. "Just for people to get paid, and for the company to stop collapsing under a lie." His expression didn't change, but something behind it shifted. "You understand what happens next?" he asked. I didn't. Not fully, but I nodded anyway. He extended a hand. Cool, firm, final. "You did the right thing." When Warren left the cafe, he was already dialing someone. He didn't lower his voice. Men like him don't hide. That night, everything snapped into motion. But not the way I expected. Friday morning, 8:03 a.m. Mark called me before I even got to my desk. His voice was tense, clipped. "Jake, I got word someone's been asking questions. Investors, apparently." I didn't answer. "This is serious. Very serious. If you hear anything else, you come to me. Immediately." I still didn't answer. He exhaled sharply. "Jake, I need you calm. We're waiting on that transfer. You know how this works." And that was it. The moment the whole story pivoted. The moment the weight moved from my shoulders to his. I cut him off. "No more." Just 2 words. A breath. Small, but seismic. Because they weren't frustration anymore. They weren't pleading. They weren't fear. They were a verdict. He didn't speak for almost 10 seconds. Then, in a strangled voice, "What did you do?" But it was too late for questions, too late for lies, too late for him. By 10:15 a.m., 3 black cars pulled into our parking lot. Not police. Worse, investors. They walked in with folders, directives, and authority. Mark couldn't charm, dodge, or dilute. Employees froze. Doors opened. Offices were swept. Questions were asked with the kind of tone that demands honesty and ends careers. And then the silence hit. The kind that means something's gone wrong. Inside Mark's office, voices rose. Not yelling, just sharp, clipped disbelief. I didn't go near the door. I didn't need to. I already knew how it ended. When they finally walked him out, his face wasn't angry. It was stunned. A man who built his whole kingdom on secrets, suddenly realizing the walls weren't his anymore. And as he passed my desk, not meeting my eyes, not speaking, not breathing right, I felt it. The first small, sharp burst of catharsis. Not victory, not revenge, just clarity. They thought I was gone. I wasn't. And now, neither was the truth. When they escorted Mark out of the building, it didn't feel triumphant. It felt quiet. The kind of quiet that settles after a storm, where the air is still heavy, but the danger has already passed. People stared, not at him, at me, like they were waiting to see if I'd follow or collapse, or finally explain the thing everyone had sensed without fully understanding. But I didn't say a word. I just sat at my desk, fingers steepled, breathing in the first clean air the company had felt in months. By noon, Warren and the other investors had taken full control. HR was told to go home. Finance was told to stay. The investors held a brief meeting in the conference room. No speeches, no drama, just decisions. When they called me in, I thought it was for clarification. It wasn't. Warren gestured for me to sit. "Jake," he said, "we've reviewed your documentation. Every line of it checks out. You prevented a disaster." I shook my head. I didn't want anything ruined. He studied me with the kind of gaze that weighs a man, not his words. "And that," he said, "is why you're going to help rebuild this place." Rebuild. The word hit different. It wasn't praise. It was permission. "Effective today," he continued, "we're appointing interim leadership. We need stability, competence, someone who already understands the chaos, but wasn't part of creating it." For a second, I genuinely thought he meant someone else. Then he slid a folder across the table. My name was on it. "We'd like you to step in as operations lead. Temporarily at first, permanently if it suits you." I didn't breathe for a moment, not out of excitement, out of that strange, fragile feeling when you realize the ground under you has shifted in your favor for reasons that finally make sense. "I just wanted people paid," I said quietly. "And they will be," Warren replied, "starting in 30 minutes. The funds cleared this morning. Properly this time." I exhaled slowly, tension unraveling from my shoulders, like threads finally letting go. Before I left the room, he added, almost as an afterthought, "Jake, we didn't know, but now we do." The pay hit everyone's accounts before 1 p.m. I didn't need to refresh mine. My phone buzzed with the notification while I was walking through the hallway. Lydia saw me and didn't smile. Not fully. It was something softer. Relief that didn't want to embarrass itself in public. "Thank you," she whispered. A couple of the field guys clapped me on the back as they passed. Jokes returned. Real ones this time. The kind that sound like breathing again. No celebration, no champagne. Just the quiet return of normal life. The most underrated victory there is. Mark didn't come back to clean out his office. Someone else did it for him. A cardboard box, a locked drawer forced open, a nameplate unscrewed, no drama, just consequences. By the end of the day, the building felt different. Not fixed, not perfect, but possible. Windows letting in light again, conversations no longer whispered, Work being done without the tension of wondering if anyone would ever see the money for it. At 5:40 p.m., I finally left the office. For the first time in months, the walk to my car felt normal. Just the sound of my footsteps, the evening breeze, the knowledge that nothing awful was waiting for me on the other side of my phone screen. I got in, shut the door, and sat for a moment with my hands on the wheel, letting it all settle. For months, I'd lived under someone else's lie. Now the lie was gone. So was the man who built it. The company would recover. People would get paid. No more secrets. No more delays. No more waiting on transfers that were never coming. Just a clean slate, a quiet one. As I pulled out of the parking lot, the sun was low behind the buildings, warm, steady, unhurried. It struck me that peace doesn't announce itself. It doesn't kick down the door. It just arrives, like the absence of something that shouldn't have been there in the first place. On the drive home, windows cracked, radio low, I thought about the last message Mark ever left me. That warning, that order, that plea. We're waiting on that transfer. No more questions. He was right about one thing. No more. No more carrying the weight someone else created. No more bending the truth until it snapped. No more pretending everything was fine. Just life. Mine again. Simple. Calm. And earned.